The state of Florida is known for a lot of things. I mean, it's known for its beautiful beaches, amusement parks, groves upon groves upon groves of orange trees. And of course, with orange trees, there is orange juice. And it also is known for its tall palm trees. But if you drive down State Road 24 in Central Florida, you will see splash pine, swamps, palmetto. You wouldn't even think twice. You would not think that there was once a town there called Rosewood. I want to tell you the story of how one woman's lie caused an entire town to completely be wiped out, disappear. And when I say disappear, I mean homes, businesses, churches, everything completely gone, wiped off the map. And when I say disappear, I also mean the innocent residents in that town were forced to run away, and the ones that were not blessed enough to get away, they were brutally murdered. So here's that story. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. If this is not your first time, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. I hope that you do decide to join the family and stay by hitting that like button, that subscribe button, and ringing that bell. Now, this is, as I always say, a very diverse channel. I talk about all types of things on this channel. I am doing a series. This is going to be part of the series that I call Parrots and True Crime, or Parrots in History. But sorry, unfortunately, there are no parrots in this video. I would put links in the description box below of my parrots. I'm pretty sure if you subscribe, you will find something that you like. Now, if you are interested in more of the Parrots and True Crime or the Parrots and History videos in the series that I'm doing, make sure you turn on the notification bell so when I post one, you will not miss it. You will be notified. Now, I usually try to do them every other Thursday, but this topic right here was a little bit much. I want to go ahead and put out a trigger warning. You really need to be in a good headspace, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Make sure you tackle your own individual issues. So this is not the video that's going to help you decompress. It's not. It's a lot of, I just want to give you a trigger warning. It talks about assaults, essays. It talks about it's a massacre, so it talks about lynchings, hangings, just a lot. So if you're not in the right headspace to handle that, then I definitely recommend that you click off this video and check out some of more lighter videos, or either catch me in the next one. I definitely completely understand. It took a lot for me to research and compose it, so I understand if you can't be here for it. Your mental health is the most important. So some of you never heard of the town of Rosewood. So if you are a follower of Bailey Sarian, you may have recently been introduced to Rosewood from Bailey Sarian. Also, there was a 1997 John Singleton film, the same name, of Rosewood. Now, the thing about that, John Singleton himself said that movie was dramatized. He said that it was, I don't want to get it wrong. He said that it was informative entertainment. So while the story itself of what happened in Rosewood in that movie was accurate, a lot of the things were highly dramatized and things were added in, and so it's just good to get the story without that. Now, I do applaud Bailey Sarian. Before she actually covered this, I was already researching it, already preparing to do a video on it. I do applaud her for shedding light on it, but the problem that I had with Bailey Sarian covering it is that she has a very large following, but some of the there were some things that she got wrong, so I hope to correct that in this video. And I think the lightheartedness and the jokes in that video were really inappropriate, so I really didn't like that. But I am a Bailey Sarian fan, just to let you know, but that just kind of hit me the wrong way. Check out, if you want to know what I mean, check out on Auto On Demand's video, which will be in the description box below. There are timestamps in the description box below if you just want to skip around. So I'm just going to chit chat for a minute because I'm trying to prepare myself to start talking about this topic. Like I said, it's a lot. I kept pushing this video back more and more, and then recently I saw Abigail Efleck. Eflick, if that is right, or the Victoria's Secret Karen is what internet is calling her. People wonder why black people feel the need to record. It's because now we are in an era where there are cell phones, there are iPhones, there are, CTV everywhere, where everything's being recorded. People have rings on their houses, on their doorbell. They have cameras on their houses, but that always wasn't the case. Most people may not know our history, but we know our history. In the black community, we do have oral history. It's kind of getting out now. It's not as prevalent as it used to be. I'm about to be 38. So when I was younger, my dad would set us down and he would tell us, stories of black history, things that you wouldn't find in the history book. My grandmother would do the same thing. My Uncle Pete, he would do the same thing. And he actually pretty much raised my dad. So he would do the same thing. He would sit us down and he would get the Bible and he would tell us how blessed we were to be in the day that we're in, because back in his day, XYZ happened. So we have our history. So there's a lot of history that's been passed down generation to generation in the black community that is not in the history books. You may find news articles way back when in the archives or whatever, things that haven't been destroyed. But it's oral history, the reasons of why we know these stories. And I felt like I need to tackle some of these stories because it's getting to the point now that grandmother and great uncle are like in their 30s and no one's talking about this stuff, like how we would sit down on the holidays, Thanksgiving, and sit around the table and have Uncle P or my dad or my grandmother and just tell us of this oral history about the things that our race has overcome. We don't have that anymore. Like people are just now learning about the Tulsa Massacre. People are just now learning what Juneteenth was, and I've been through those things because they was talked about during the holidays at the round table in our family. So the same thing happened with Amy Cooper, who was, people call her the Central Park Karen. Same thing happened with her when it was caught on camera. She's saying, I'm gonna call the police and I'm gonna tell them a black man is threatening me. There has been so many times in history there has been massacres and murders and lynching of black people simply because of one person's lie, one non-black person's lie. I'm just gonna put it that way. One non-black person's lie. Lives have been lost. Entire towns have been slaughtered, all because of a lie. Now we have cell phones that are used to be recorded to tell the truth. So I do want to say again, I do want to put a disclaimer out there. And I keep looking down because I do have notes and I'm also trying to make sure that I'm in focus. But this video is very triggering. I'm gonna do my best to not be too graphic, but I also want people to know the reality of what happened to these innocent people. The people who committed these crimes are not your neighbors. They're not your co-workers. They're not the person that you see in the grocery store. There's no reason to have any hate in your heart against any group of people. So just because you hear about what one group of people did to another group of people, that's no reason to have hate in your heart for that particular group of people. There's no need for that. The person that you see today is not responsible for the injustices done to your ancestors. So show love to everyone everywhere. This video isn't about placing blame or causing hate or pointing fingers. It's about history. I saw someone with a very large Confederate flag on their truck, and it pretty much covered the whole back window of their truck, and it has on there heritage, not hate. So when I'm telling these stories, I'm telling it because this is our heritage. It has nothing to do with hate. So if you can't watch this video without feeling hate for someone of another race, for someone who has no control of what their ancestors did, definitely click off the video, because I don't want to cause anyone to have any hate in their heart. Now, of course, I wasn't there when these things happened. What I've done is I've researched, compiled the information. There are conflicting reports. I tried to go with the most common stories, the most common themes. I'm going based on, oral histories told from the survivors, interviews with survivors. There have been deeds and news articles that I was able to find from that time, and just basic, Wikipedia and encyclopedia.com and, Rosewood websites, just a lot of different websites, and just compile this information. So there may even though how, when it happened may conflict, the thing that does not conflict is the fact that it happened. So we know that it did happen. If there's something that I get wrong in this video, I mean, no disrespect, I try to do the best that I can to fact check everything that I have here in my notes. Now, feel free to correct me, but just don't be a jerk about it. There's no need. Now, people will say it didn't happen. People will say it was a lie. People will say Rosewood never existed. Though records are limited and much of this comes from the survivors, there were white news publications that reported it. So some falsely called it a race riot or a race war, but during this video I'm going to call it what it was. It was a massacre. Many like to pretend that racism, it was in Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, South Carolina, Texas, Louisiana, and places like that, and they always forget about Florida. Florida was on fire in the 1800s and in the early 1900s with racism. Was on fire with racism, but not a lot of people talk about Florida and how it embraced the Jim Crow era and the Black Code. Florida had an extremely high number of lynchings before the Rosewood Massacre of 1923. So they were already on the map for just having an extremely high number of lynchings before this even happened. Still not known exactly how many people were actually killed in the Rosewood Massacre. The official reports the official reports in white publications, they said that it was 8 people, 6 black, 2 white, but the unofficial report says anywhere between 27 and 150 people. So let's jump into this story. So Rosewood was originally settled in 1847. Now it was settled and it was a big place for the timber industry, and it was called Rosewood because of the reddish color inside of the cedar when you cut it. Initially, Rosewood was black and white residents. Town grew. They had a post office and a train depot around 1870. Now all the cedar trees were cut down and the pencil mills closed, because you know how we are as humans, we always just mine and do things to extinction. We can't just do it just a little bit, we got to do it all the way to extinction. So that's what happened with the cedars in Rosewood. So the what the white people did, they leased or they sold their land to the black residents that were left there, and they moved to Sumner. The post office closed and the school closed because it was predominantly white post office, white school. So that closed and moved to Sumner as well. There was a cypress mill that was opened up in Sumner, and it was about 3 miles west of Rosewood. White people moved to Sumner, where there were several turpentine mills, sawmills, and citrus and cotton fields to be formed. By the 1900s, Rosewood was predominantly black and Sumner was predominantly white, and they were 3 miles apart. And at this time, the relationships between the two towns were really good. They were amicable. It's like even the residents, though the black residents lived in Rosewood, they still went to Sumner. Some of them worked for the white people in Sumner and worked in the mills for the white people in Sumner. A lot of people want you to think that Rosewood was just this shoddy town. There were shacks everywhere. It was just this boo, 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 boo. No. Though Rosewood was predominantly black, it was 100% self-sufficient. They had 3 churches, a sugar mill, baseball team called the Rosewood Stars, 2 general stores. One was owned by a white man called John Wright, and then there was the other one that was owned by a black man. Now, they were not living in these rundown shacks like some people like to try to report. The residents, they lived in like 2-story plank houses, smaller 2-room homes, and there were also several unoccupied farms and storage structures there as well. Now, the families in their homes, they had organs in their homes and pianos in their homes, and it was symbols of, middle class prosperity when you had whether you can play it or not, but they knew how to play them. I'm just trying to lighten the mood on the video. It was like a symbol. So in 1995, a survivor by the name of Robin Martin, she was 79 years old at the time, she came out and she said Rosewood was a town where everybody's house was painted. There were roses everywhere you walked. It was just lovely. They also had their own wells. There were 2 powerful black families in Rosewood. The first one was the Goins. Now the Goins, they are the ones who bought the turpentine industry into the area. They're the 2nd largest landowners in Levy County. This is Levy County, not just the city of Rosewood or the town of Rosewood, but Levy County, period. The brothers, they moved to Gainesville to avoid lawsuits from white competitors. The land back then, it was all about land back in the day. It was all about land. There was a lot of competition and even murders for land back in that time. So because they didn't want the competition, they just moved their business, their turpentine business, to Gainesville. And now the Carrier family was another powerful black family in the area. They worked in logging, and by the 1920s, anyone was like distantly related to the Carriers somehow. They either married into the family or were born into the family, but somehow someone was related to the Carrier. Frances Frannie Taylor was a wife and mother too. She was 22 years old, and she was married to Mr. James Taylor. Now James worked in Sumner at Coomer and Sons Mill. Yeah, Coomer and Sons Mill. So he had to leave early in the morning while it was still dark. The neighbors said that Fannie was peculiar and aloof. No one really knew her well. It sounds like she was a little obsessive compulsive when it came to cleaning her floors. She wanted her floors scrubbed with bleach all the time until they were white. So she had a thing about her floors. So don't know why that mattered, but that's what I kept finding about her, so I decided I would put it in the video. Let's get into Miss Fannie's claim. So while it was still dark, the morning of January 1st, 1923, Frannie's neighbor, they heard her screaming, and so the neighbor, she grabbed her revolver, and she's like, what's going on? She ran to Frannie's house. So Frannie had obviously been assaulted. She had, bruises on her. You can see that she had obviously been assaulted. She was bruised and beaten. So her notoriously white floors, they knew something was wrong because her notorious white floors had all kind of scuff marks on them, and they had never seen Fannie's floors was always white, and so they knew that something was wrong. When the neighbor kept pressing Fannie for what happened to her, Fannie said that a black man came through the back door and assaulted her. So she kept screaming for someone to get her baby, and the neighbor went and got her baby, and the baby was not harmed at all. The baby wasn't harmed. Fannie initially said that she was beaten and not R-word. We know what that is, okay? YouTube is really sensitive about saying that word, so I'm not gonna say it. You know how the rumor mill is. Do you remember when you were in school where you would start a sentence with this person, the first person, and by the time it gets to the end, it's like a completely different thing? That's how it was in Fannie's case. By the time everything was said and done, it said that Fannie was beaten, assaulted, raped, and robbed. So no one should be R-word or beaten or assaulted or anything like that. But the idea that this happened to an innocent white woman by a black man, it put the town in a frenzy. They were ready for blood. Now, the day before, which was New Year's Eve, there was a KKK rally and parade about 50 miles away in Gainesville. So, people talking, so you already know what's going on. The neighbor eventually noticed that Sarah Carrier wasn't there. She was the laundress, or did laundry for Sarah Taylor. And as you know, the Carrier family was, one of the most powerful families in Rosewood. So the white women in Sumner, they liked Sarah Carrier. Everyone called her Aunt Sarah. Even the white people there, they called her Aunt Sarah. So Aunt Sarah, she regularly took her grandchildren, Philomena and Arnett, Goins, to Sumner with her to help her clean the houses and do the laundry and everything. Sarah and Philomena had already told that they had seen a white man leaving Fannie's house. Plot thickens. The grandson Arnett said he had seen the white man before. So when they saw Fannie afterwards, there was evidence that she had been beaten. So when Sarah heard the story of a black man assaulting Fannie, her and Philomena and Arnett, they already knew that this wasn't true. So Sarah told them, she said she could not tell the white people what she really saw, or she knew that she couldn't go against a white woman in this time and call her a liar. Again, there were no cell phones. There's no proof of anything. So the black community and the people of Rosewood believed that Fannie's lover had beaten her and attacked her, and she decided to lie to her husband and say that she was beaten and attacked by a black man just to cover up the fact that she was having an affair. No one ever said she wasn't beaten. Where the conflicts come in is who beat her. This white man who was allegedly her lover, or this black man who was allegedly not real. I don't know. So Levy County Sheriff, Mr. Robert Walker, he started an investigation and raised a posse. So what a posse is basically a group of people mobilized by a conservator of peace, typically a sheriff, to suppress the lawlessness or defend the county. So it's not a mob. It's like a posse, just like he's just deputizing people just to help him get this thing under control. It's basically what it was. So eventually they found out that a black man by the name of Jesse Hunter had recently escaped the chain gang. Know where this is going? So 400 white men gathered from Cedar Key, Otter Creek, Chiefland, and Bronson to help with the search. So some were deputies. There was no way 400 of them were deputized to be in this posse. So at this point, it's becoming like a mob. Some white men did refuse to participate. One white man said he did not want to have blood on his hands, and he knew the intent of these men. He already knew. He's like, nope, I'm not doing it. I ain't having nothing to do with it. I don't want no blood on my hands. No. So he did not participate. The dogs led a group of 100 to 150 men to Sarah Carrier's nephew's house, which was named Aaron Carrier. Now Aaron was taken outside. His mother begged the men not to kill him. They tied him to a car and they drug him to Sumner. The men began drinking and taking the law into their own hand. Sheriff Walker, he was like, this is getting out of control. So he tried to uphold the law by putting Aaron Carrier in protective custody and Bronson away from the posse and the mob. He was worried that the posse, of course, would continue to act on their own authority. And then when you get gun and alcohol involved and hatred and anger, it's not a good mix. So he was hidden in the Gainesville jail for 6 months. So Sheriff Walker did not want to see this man killed. He did not want to see anyone killed. He wanted to literally find this person who did this. He was safe in Gainesville. He was tended to by black doctors, and he eventually recovered from the 3-mile drag from his house to Sumner. So I know I put a trigger warning in the beginning. I'm going to put another one here about Aaron Carrier's wife. Her name was Maholda Brown Carrier, and I do hope I said her name right. I'm going to call her Gussie because that is, from what I found, that is what everyone called her. So she was a teacher in Rosewood. She was captured the same night by the mob after they had already taken her husband to Sumner. She was tortured, and they wanted her to admit a lie. They kept asking her over and over again where her husband was the previous night, and she wouldn't let up. She became noticeably upset. Like, I've told y'all, my husband was at home in the bed with me. What are you talking about? We don't know no Jesse Hunter. He was in the bed with me. What are you talking about? So when they saw that she became, a little irritated with them and she wouldn't let up, they didn't like that. They decided to try to break her by R-wording her, gang R-wording her. According to Lizzie Polly Robinson Brown Jenkins, who's Gussie's niece, they got Gussie. I'm going to read exactly what she said. They got Gussie. That was my aunt's name. They tied a rope around her neck. However, they didn't drag her. They put her in the car and they took her to Sumner. Don't know if you know, a Southern tradition is to build a fire and sit around the fire and drink liquor and talk trash. So they had her there like she was the accused, and they were the jury, and they were trying to force her into admitting a lie. Where was your husband last night? He was at home in bed with me. They asked her so many times that she got indignant with them, and they said she's a bold B word, let's R-word the B word. And they did, gang style. Gussie was later found alive by Sheriff Walker, and she was taken to safety. Thank God. So I am going to give you another trigger warning. We're going to go into talking about Mr. Sam Carter. There are timestamps in the description box below if you need to skip to the next time, but it's gonna be a lot that happened with this one. The anger, the guns, the vigilantes, it always happens when something like this happens. They became a mob. They took a local blacksmith by the name of Sam Carter. He was a blacksmith, and he also worked at the turpentine mill. So they tortured Sam. He finally admitted that he did help the escaped prisoner. He took a group to the spot in the woods where he had taken Hunter. Dogs were not able to pick up the scent. Now, the reason that the dogs were not able to pick up the scent because where he supposedly took Jesse Hunter in the woods was to a river. And as you know, once they get in the river, the dogs are gonna lose the scent, common sense. So because the dogs couldn't pick up the scent, they shot him in the face. No one knows who fired the shot. People were actually surprised that this happened. And so what they did was they mutilated his body. They hung it from a tree, and as a symbol, and this was often done during this era, the time of lynchings and Jim Crow, Black codes. This was often done where a person would be lynched, mutilated, and their body would be hung in trees as a symbol for other Black people to kind of keep them under control. Like, look, you get out of control, this can happen to you too. So that's what it was. They hung him from a tree, just left his mutilated body there, and the mob was surrounded. They took his clothes. They took his clothes. Now, the thing was, according to Rosewood survivors, is Sam Carter did give the Gussie party a ride, but it wasn't the prisoner Jesse Hunter. It was Frannie's lover that he gave a ride. He knew that he would be in trouble for beating the. I couldn't find his name anywhere. So Frannie's lover knew that he would be in trouble for beating her. He knew that the hammer was going to come down on him. So he went to Aaron Carrier's home in Rosewood. He was a fellow veteran and a Mason. Now, if you know, and Sam Carter was a Mason as well. If you know anything about vets and Masons, they are going to sit together no matter what your national origin is, your skin color. Vets and Masons, they are going to stick together. So what they did was they covered him in the back of a wagon, and they took him to the nearby river. He met the mob after letting Frannie's lover out of the wagon. So more than likely he crossed the river, and that's why the dogs could not pick up his scent. Now, again, he did give, according to Rosewood survivors, he did give a ride to the guilty party, but it was Frannie's lover, the white man. And he only did so because, of course, he's a white man, number one. Number two, he was fellow veteran and a Mason. After lynching Sam Carter, the mob actually met up with Sylvester Carrier. Now, he was Sarah's son. And remember Sarah, she's Aunt Sarah, who actually worked for Frannie, who really saw what happened. They told him to get out of town, but he refused and started gathering people to protect. And at that time, the mob, they didn't bother him. They let him go. They didn't bother him at the time. All accounts and everything that I found so far, they all say the same thing, that Sheriff Walker actually tried to regain control and disperse the mob. From what my understanding is, he tried really, really hard, but he just wasn't able to. You have one person against 400, who you think gonna win? And there's Jack Daniels or whatever they're drinking, in the mix. Who you think gonna win? So Mr. W.H. Pillsbury was a mill supervisor, and he tried to help the sheriffs disperse the mob as well, but they were out for blood. It's like once a dog tastes blood, they go into a frenzy, or a shark smells or tastes blood, they go into a frenzy. So after the lynching of Sam Carter, people were in a frenzy. This mob was in a frenzy. They wanted more blood. On the evening of January the 4th, the armed mob, they surrounded Sarah Carrier's home and Aunt Sarah. So there was approximately 15 to 25 people hiding and seeking refuge in her home. Now, the children were hiding upstairs under mattresses. Some of the children were Aunt Sarah's grandchildren who were visiting her for Christmas. So Sylvester and possibly two other men were there to protect them. Sylvester is thought to be the only one that was armed. News is conflicting reports. So Sylvester is thought to be the only one that was actually armed in this house. So many of the white people already didn't care for Sylvester. They thought that he was uppity or arrogant and disrespectful. They said he was too proud and too independent. So they really didn't like Sylvester. According to Rosewood residents, he was a formidable character, a crack shot, expert hunter, and music teacher. So everyone just called him Man. But he was Don Cheadle's character in the movie Rosewood. So the New York Times reported that he said, and I can't see this happening, but the New York Times reported that Sylvester said that when this happened to Frannie, he said, it's an example of what Negroes could do without interference. Is that really? Remember they said he was intelligent. He was a teacher, music teacher. Did it really sound like something that, okay, you know what? Every Rosewood survivor disputes that Sylvester would even say anything like that. They were inflamed by that reported statement. Okay, so this is how he feels. All right, are we gonna go to his house? We're gonna take care of him. So they also believe that he was hiding Jesse Hunter. Now keep in mind, even though the dog tracked this person that they're looking for, now they're thinking that the dog's been taken to Sylvester's house. The dog took him to the river. But they're like, okay, he's hiding him. He's not in the river. He didn't cross the river. Common sense says, yeah, he didn't cross the river. He went back to Sylvester's house. So they went to Sylvester's house. Reports vary on who shot the first shot. So I really don't know who shot the first shot. There are so many conflicting reports on who shot the first shot. Now, Sarah Carrier, Aunt Sarah, she was shot in the head. According to Minnie Lee Langley, who was 9 years old in the house at the time, she heard someone had been shot down, and she went downstairs. And she said Sylvester placed her, Minnie Lee, in a fireplace, in a firewood closet, and watched from the front door. So Mr. C.P. Polly Wickerson and Henry Andrews, they were killed after Wickerson had knocked down the door. So what happened was Wickerson actually kicked in Sylvester's door. Sylvester's already sitting there just ready for him. He shot him, and then Andrews was right behind him, so he shot Andrews. So after that happened, of course, you know, the house, it was a shootout. The house was riddled with bullets, but the house was not overtaken that night. The standoff lasted all night into the next morning. Now, Sarah and Sylvester Carrier, they were both found dead in the house. The others were wounded, and it included a child that had been shot in the eye. My God. And I researched this, but just saying it out loud, it's like, oh. At least 4 white men were wounded, and we know that one was fatally wounded. The remaining children and adults that were in the house, they did run into the back of the woods, and they crossed the dirt roads one at a time, just to make sure that they wouldn't be seen, and not only seen, but actually killed by the white men that were there. So they hid under a bush until they had all gathered together, and then they went into the swamps and hid into the swamps. So news of the standoff at the Carrier's house, it of course attracted more white men from the state, from all over the state, like all over the state, to come and help out, because, you know, we got these black vigilantes, even though it's just people who are defending their house. So that's why I don't trust the media. Now, Miami Metropolis listed 20 black people and 4 white people dead. They called it a race war, but it wasn't a race war. It wasn't a race war. Washington Post and St. Louis Dispatch described it as a band of heavily banned Negroes and a Negro desperado being involved, which was not true. Now, this is where Ving Rhames, if you saw the movie, this is where Ving Rhames' character came from. It's the rumors of this black Negro desperado. There was Rosewood residents who refused to go see the movie because that was a complete fabrication. That never happened. There was never some black men out there never some black men out there as a vigilante just killing off white people like it was like in the movie. That never happened. So that was one of the reasons why the residents refused to see the movie once they saw the preview, because they was like, no, that's foolishness, that never happened. According to historian Thomas Dye, the idea of blacks in Rosewood had taken up arms against white racists was unthinkable in the Deep South. So the black newspapers actually covered it from a completely different angle. They highlighted, you know, African American heroism and called the white people savages because they were just out murdering, killing black people. Another newspaper reported, I'm just reading this off because I want to get it right. 2 Negro women were attacked and R-word between Rosewood and Sumner. The sexual lust of brutal white mobbish satisfied then the women were strangled. So I am sorry if things look a little different. I look a little different. I had to take a break. Like I said, this topic is very heavy, so I just had to take a little break and do some praying and just, you know, so to try not to get overwhelmed with emotions. And the most emotion that I feel with talking about this is sadness. So I want to be able to get through the video. So I apologize for if things look a little different. Let's jump right back into the account. We're going to talk about James Carrier. James Carrier was Sylvester's brother and Sarah's son. And I couldn't find out why, but for some reason he left the safety of the swamp. He had already escaped Rosewood, and he was hiding in the swamp with the rest of the residents of Rosewood that were able to escape out. Now, as I was recording this, it actually dawned on me that the reason that he left the swamp was because he was paralyzed, and I'm pretty sure he couldn't stand in that water, couldn't get around. So that's why he left the swamps. That just dawned on me. The ones that weren't being hidden, and we'll get into that in a second. But for some reason he left the safety of the swamps and went back to Rosewood. He asked his supervisor W.H. Pillsbury for protection. So Pillsbury, he locked him inside his house. He locked him in a house, and if you remember, W.H. Pillsbury was the sawmill supervisor, and he was actually trying to help the Rosewood residents. So what he did was he took James Carrier and he hid them inside of a house, but the mob still find him. They tortured him to try to find out if he aided Jesse Hunter. Of course he did not. He had previously suffered a stroke, and he was partially paralyzed on one side, but they still made him dig his own grave, and then they shot him. The white mob, they burned the black churches in Rosewood. Philomena Goins' cousin, Lee Ruth Davis, she was a survivor of Rosewood, and she later gave an account of how she heard the bells tolling in the church as the men inside of it set it on fire. The men also destroyed the white church that was in Rosewood, so they just destroyed all the churches in Rosewood, white or black. Many black residents, they fled for safety and they hid in the swamps, and most of them were just clothed in their pajamas because all of this happened at night and they had to try to escape under the cover of darkness. And Wilson Hall, he was a Rosewood survivor, and he remembered being awakened early in the morning while it was still dark outside by his parents, and he was 9 years old at the time, and them telling him, like, you know, come on, get up, we gotta go, and them running from their home going into the swamps. And he said they saw lights from approaching cars of white men could be seen for miles. You can just see lights and lights and lights from the cars approaching, of the white men in these cars approaching. They can just see it for miles. It was just that many people. Imagine, like, remember it was like 400 people out there. So he recalled that he and his family walked 15 miles to the town of Gulf Hamlet. He and other Rosewood survivors, they both recall that it was uncharacteristically cold for that time of year in Florida. You know, Florida's usually not that cold. It's January, it's cold most other places, but Florida is not usually that cold. But for some reason that year it was uncharacteristically cold that year in Florida. So they're in the swamps in pajamas. It was just very severe conditions in these swamps. But they didn't have a choice. It's either be cold, be wet in these swamps to evade the white mob, or go back to Rosewood or show your face or try to get on dry land and be killed. And but some survivors, they did actually find refuge with Sympathetic Whites, and we will get into that in a minute. Sam Carter, if you remember Sam Carter, he was the one that actually gave a ride to Fanny's lover. His 69-year-old widow, she was actually taken to safety. She hid in the swamps for 2 days, Then she was driven by a sympathetic white mail carrier. He hid her up under his bags, and she was able to join her family in Chiefland. So what the white men would do, they would actually surround the houses in Rosewood, and they would pour accelerants. I found it was kerosene. I believe it was kerosene that they poured all over the houses, all around the houses, and then they lit the houses on fire. Now, when the residents came out running from the burning homes, the white men, they would shoot them. So they would basically light the houses on fire to see if someone was still in there. Of course, when you're in there, there's smoke, there's fire. You have to eventually run out. When you run out, when they ran out, they were shot at. So there was Miss Lexi Gordon. She was a light-skinned 50-year-old. I don't know why light skin mattered, but everything I found about her just kept pointing out the fact that she was light-skinned, so I'm going to point that out as well. So Lexi Gordon was a light-skinned 50-year-old woman who was ill with typhoid fever. So she sent her children into the home to escape. She hid under her home trying to hide. They set her home on fire and shot her with a shotgun in the face when she fled the burning home. Frannie Taylor's brother-in-law claimed to be the one who killed her. So on January the 5th, more whites, they converged on the area. They came to the area, and it was a mob of an additional, you already have about 400. There was a mob of an additional 200 to 300. Some actually came from out of state. You Georgia hearing about what's going on, South Carolina hearing about what's going on. So some of these men actually were from out of state. So remember what I said, there was sympathetic white. So there were some white people who were very sympathetic, who did not want to be a part of this. So I don't want you to think that every white person had a part in this. That's one thing I don't like about society, is we put people in a box, and we say, when we say white people, every single white, no. There were some white people who were risking their lives to try to protect the black residents of Rosewood, who suffered their entire lives for the choices that they made, and we'll get into that in a minute. But Sheriff Walker pleaded with news reporters to just not cover the story, okay, if you're gonna cover the story, but ask for help. Let people know that we need help out here to protect our black residents of Levy County. Of course, they didn't do that. So he asked them to send a message to Alachua County Sheriff P.G. Ramsey for help. Carloads of men came from Gainesville to assist the sheriff, but they were still outnumbered. And it was even thought that some of these men that came to assist the sheriff, they participated in the Ku Klux Klan rally, which was a week before. Remember the mill owner or the mill supervisor, W.H. Pillsbury? I talked about him a couple of times. He tried desperately to keep his black workers in the mill in Sumner so they won't be exposed to what was going on in Roseville. His assistant Johnson, he actually helped him to try to dissuade the white workers from joining, like, stay out of this. Don't do it. You're going to lose your job. Don't do this. These are people that you've been working with every single day. Do not do this. So Pillsbury's wife, she actually secretly smuggled black Rosewood residents. She hid them in her home. She smuggled them out. She got them to safety. So armed guards turned away black people who emerged from the swamps when they tried to go home. So they did have armed guards there. And when people tried to leave the swamps and go to their home, like, hey, it ain't safe. Go on back to the swamps. Now go back to the swamps. It's not safe. So they were protecting them by, I know it seems harsh, but that's really all that they can do. They can only just warn them, like, don't go back. Go back to the swamps. Don't go back to your home. It's not safe. So it was as a warning. So they tried to keep them from the violence that waited for them in Rosewood. And several white men, as I said, they refused to join the mob. The town barber refused to lend. Someone actually wanted to join the mob, and they didn't even have their own gun. They went to the barber to try to barber his gun. He wouldn't even leave his gun. He said that he did not want his hands wet with blood. Governor Kerry Harold, I believe that's a typo. Harold was on standby with the National Guard to neutralize the situation. Walker he insisted and he told him that he can handle the situation. The governor's office monitored the situation in part because of the tense northern interest. It's not because he really cared. It was just the northerners were putting pressure on him. So yeah, records show that Governor Hardy took Sheriff Walker's word that he could handle everything. Instead of him standing by just in case things change, he went on a hunting trip. So on to January the 6th. So we're 6 days into this massacre. John and William Bryce, they were brothers and they were conductors who they were independently wealthy. They had their own train. They actually lived in Cedar Key and they had an affinity for trains. They just love trains. They managed to evacuate some of the black residents to Gainesville, so they were able to get them from Rosewood to Gainesville. They already knew the Rosewood residents because they traded with them, and what they would do was, as they got ready to pass the Rosewood area, they would blow their horns and they would slow their trains so they would pick up, so the women and children can get on. Now they would not allow any men to get on because they feared the mobs. They didn't want to get attacked they didn't want to get attacked themselves, so they actually feared the mob. So my take on it is, if something happened and they were stopped and they was found that they had all these black people on the train, if they saw that it was women and children, there was no way it could be the escaped prisoner Jesse Hunter, because it was only women and children there. So that's what I believe is why they didn't want any of the men on there. Now, Mr. John Wright, he was the owner of the One White General Store in Rosewood. Now he and his wife Mary Jo, they actually hid many survivors. Over the next several days, other residents fled to the White's house. It was facilitated by Sheriff Walker. So what Sheriff Walker would do is he would help some of the black residents get to Walker's house, and Walker and his wife would hide. And they would hide them for a while, and then they would smuggle them out of town. They would transport them out of town as soon as possible, as soon as the coast was clear, as soon as they could. So there were several white residents in Sumner that hid, because remember, Rosewood was all black. Sumner was 3 miles away, all white. So, and the black people in Rosewood, they worked for these people in Sumner, and some of them had a really good relationship with them, and they didn't want to see these people who babysat their kids, who did their laundry, who cleaned their floors, they did not want to see these people just killed and massacred this way. So there were several white residents in Sumner who hid black residents and smuggled them out of town any chance that they could. The Gainesville black community took in many Rosewood evacuees. The survivors were covered in sheets, and as Gainesville met them and welcomed them at the train station. There were still a dozen or so structures that remain in Rosewood on Sunday out of all days. So on Sunday, January 7th, we're 7 days in now. January 7th, a mob of 100 to 150 whites returned to burn the remaining structures in Rosewood. And it was just structures that was just left there. And what people did, they just went and they burned down all the other structures in the town. And the only other structure, there was only one structure that remained in the town. That was Mr. Wright's General Store. That was the only structure that remained in town. I know you're probably wondering, like, was anyone ever persecuted? Did anything happen? You probably know how this ends. While many people, they were alarmed by the violence, and many people were alarmed by the violence that was done in Rosewood, but nothing was done. No one was held accountable. No one was punished for the heinous acts that were done against the Rosewood residents. State leaders, they feared the negative. I'm sorry. State leaders, they feared the negative effects that it would have on their tourist industry. So let me repeat that. State leaders, they fear the negative effects that trying to bring people accountable for this would, and the fact that this happened, they were afraid that it will negatively impact the tourist industry. Florida has always been a high tourist state, and they were just afraid that this would affect their tourist industry. So Governor Harvey did appoint a special prosecuting attorney to investigate the incidents of what happened in Rosewood. In February of the same year, so a month later, so February of 1923, a all-white grand jury convened in Bronson, and they heard the testimonies of 25 people, 8 which were black, and they found insufficient evidence to prosecute any of the partakers. But good thing is the judge presiding over the case, he did deplore the actions of the mob. So by the end of the week, Rosewood was no longer in the headlines. So people began to act like, it would never happen. It was no longer in the headlines in the white newspaper. But the most influential black newspaper in the U.S. reported 19 people in Rosewood's race war had died. A soldier named Ted Cole appears to fight the lynch mobs, then disappeared. So there's no confirmation of this person ever existing. And again, I think that this is the inspiration for Vin Rames' character in the movie. But Rosewood residents say that there was no such person. The Gainesville Daily Sun actually justified the actions of the white mob, saying, "Let it be understood now and forever that he, whether white or black, who brutally assaults an innocent, helpless woman should die the death of a dog." I guess that didn't apply to those Rosewood residents, those innocent Rosewood black women who were actually assaulted as well. It just didn't apply to them, I guess. Remember what they did to Gussie Carrier? You remember Gussie Carrier? Now the Tampa Tribune. Now the Tampa Tribune. They had a rare comment because this was a mainly white newspaper, and what they said was a foul and lasting blow on the people of Levy County. So they did condone it in a way which most papers were not condoning it. So when it comes to the death toll, officially the recorded death toll of the first week of January 2002 and the first week of January of 1923 was 8 people, 6 black and 2 white. Historians, they strongly disagree with this number. Survivors claim that there are as many as 27 black residents killed. Several eyewitnesses claim to have seen a mass grave filled with black people. One remembers a plow bought from Cedar Key that covered 26 bodies. And by the time the authorities were interested enough to start investigating the claims, the witnesses were either dead or elderly. So this lets you know how long this happened before people were actually even interested in what happened in Rosewood. Aaron Carter, he was the one that was drugged behind the car from Rosewood to Sumner. He actually was held in jail for several months. He died in 1965. So he lived a very long life. This happened in 1923, and he lived into 1965. And his widow, Emma, she was actually shot in the hand and the wrist, and she did reach Gainesville by train, but she never recovered from her injuries, and she actually ended up dying in 1924. Sarah Carrier's husband, Hayward, he did not see the events in Rosewood. He was actually on a hunting trip. So when he came back from his hunting trip, he came back to find his wife, his brother James, and his son Sylvester. They had all been killed, and his home had been completely destroyed, burned down to the ground. The shock of what happened in Rosewood, it gave him a breakdown where he rarely spoke to anyone but himself. He only talked to himself whenever he did speak. He oftentimes wandered from his family's home unclothed, and this is before the times of nursing homes and things like that. So his grandson Arnett thought that he was just unhinged by grief. Everything that happened to him just caused something to break, and that is too much for the strongest person. Just too much. And he actually died a year after the massacre. Jesse Hunter, the escaped convict, was never found. Survivors, they went in different directions. They changed their names in fear of that they would be tracked down by white men. They would find out that they actually escaped and that they will be tracked down. So they actually changed their names. None ever returned to Rosewood. Every single survivor that I found, they refused to go back to Rosewood. And who wouldn't? Fannie Taylor and her husband, they moved to another mill town. She was raised very nervous. Even the years afterwards, she was very nervous person, and she finally succumbed to cancer. John Wright's house was the only structure left standing in Rosewood. He remained in it. He acted as an emissary between the county and the survivors. After the survivors left town, almost all their land were actually sold for taxes. And Mary Jo Wright, she died in 1961. John Wright's wife, she died in 1931. John actually developed a drinking problem. He was ostracized and taunted for assisting the Rosewood survivors. This was for the rest of his life. It was rumored that he kept a gun in every room because he was afraid that someone would try to kill him because of the part that he played or did not play in the Rosewood Massacre, because he helped all these people get to safety. He died after too much drinking one night in Cedar Key and was buried in an unmarked grave in Sumner. So some of the survivors, Rosewood survivors, as well as the people who participated in the mob, they actually went to these to La Cochee to work in the mill as well. W.H. Pillsbury, the one who owned the sawmill and supervised the sawmill in Sumner, he actually went to La Cochee as well, and he was taunted by the former Sumner residents about assisting the Rosewood residents get to safety, just like John Wright was. And he was no longer supervisor, so he no longer had that authority that he had before. So the company ended up retiring. The company ended up retiring him early. He moved to Jacksonville and he died in 1926. So he only lived 3 years after the Rosewood Massacre. Now there's a code of silence. There was a code of silence for the Rosewood survivors. Now most survivors, they scattered throughout Florida. They started over with nothing. They changed their name. They had to sacrifice education for income, because in Rosewood they had a school in Rosewood, so they were able to go to school and they were able to provide for their families as well. They took manual labor jobs, working as maids, shoe shiners, in citrus factories, as well as in lumber mills. So none of them publicly acknowledged what happened. They were afraid to talk about it. They were afraid for people to know who they were. It came from in the stories, oral history. So they were just afraid to go public with what happened. Minnie Lee Langley, she knew James and Emma Carrier as her parents. Now, she kept the story from her children for 60 whole years. She said, "I didn't want them to know what I had came through. I didn't discuss it with none of them. I just didn't want them to know what kind of way I came up. I didn't want them to know white folks want us out of our homes." Decades passed before she began to trust white people again. So some families, they did speak of Rosewood, but they forbade the stories to be told. Like I said, oral history, like you're telling your children, you're telling your grandchildren about it, but you didn't want them to tell anyone about it. So Mr. Arnett Doctor heard the same story of Rosewood from his mother, Philomena Goins Doctor. She was the one that was actually there at Fannie Taylor's house the day that she was assaulted. She told her children about what happened in Rosewood every Christmas. Like I said, that is a tradition that we need to get back to, not only in black families but in society altogether, where we got together on holidays and the elders, they told stories and let us know, how blessed we are to be where we are, and this is what we had to come through. This is the price that your ancestors had to pay to get here. Arnett was so fascinated and consumed by this story that he will oftentimes bring it up to his aunt, and she would just shut him down, and she will warn him to stop talking about it. Now in 1982, Mr. Gary Moore, he was a reporter with the St. Petersburg Times. He drove down to the Cedar Key area, and he was looking for a story, So what he did was he began to notice how gloomy the atmosphere was, and so he commented to someone. He was like, well, why was this town completely all white, and then in the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, it became, kind of half black. So, what happened to bring the black people to this area? And so local woman replied, I don't know what you're digging for. You're trying to get me to talk about that massacre. And when she said that, Moore was hooked. He knew that he had a story, and he knew he needed to find out what was going on. So of course he was able to convince Arnett Doctor to talk about it, and Arnett Doctor just spilled the beans. And he was just he did this without telling his mother or his aunt, and you know they always told him, you know, don't talk about this. His aunts, his mother, don't talk about this. And here he is spilling the beans to a reporter. So Moore addressed the disappearance of this from the record. So what Moore said was, he said, after a week of sensation, the weeks of January 1923 seemed to have dropped completely from Florida's consciousness, like some unmentionable skeleton in the family's closet. Now, when Philomena Gaines' doctor, when she found out that Arnett had actually talked to the reporter, she was livid. She was enraged. She was so enraged that she threatened to disown him. She shook him and she slapped him because, you know, this is them. They're hiding. They don't want this story out because they're afraid that if people know who they are, they will come for them. And it says here that a year later, Moore took his story to CBS. A year later, Moore took his story to CBS on 60 Minutes. And now Philomena, she found out this, and she called her family and let them know that, you know, this was lies, because she didn't want her family to know what she had gone through. She was like, this is lies. This is a whole expose full of lies, is what she said. Now, psychiatrists at University of Florida later testified at the state hearings that the survivors of Rosewood showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was made worse by secrecy. Many years after the incident, they exhibited fear, denial, hypervigilance about socializing with white people. Despite having post-traumatic stress, denial, fear, hypervigilance with dealing with whites, they actually leaned heavily towards their religious faith when it came to surviving Rosewood. And all of them said basically in some kind of way that it kept them from becoming bitter. And just to let you know, Mr. Michael DeRusso, who wrote a book about Rosewood, said, everyone told me in their own way, in their own words, that if they allowed themselves to be bitter, to hate, it would have eaten them up. And then Robbie Morton described her past by saying, I knew that something went very wrong in my life because it took a lot away from me, but I wasn't angry or anything. The Rosewood residents, regardless of all that they went through, they always said they weren't angry. They said they weren't bitter. They said that they were able to get past it. They were able to forgive. And it's mainly because of their religious faith. It's not saying what that faith is. I want to think, you know, with the time, with it being in the South, it was more than likely Christianity. That's what I'm leaning towards. And Jesus will do that. He will help you to forgive, regardless of, look at what they did to him. And he said, you know, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There's a lot more that I can talk about, but I'm going to kind of end this here because you get the gist of what happened in Rosewood. I will put some links in the description box below, interviews with the survivors, the Wikipedia article where I got most of the information from, the Rosewood website. I will put that in the description box below. Have you ever heard of Rosewood? Let me know down in the description box below. If you like me doing these types of videos, just let me know. How does this make you feel? Do you feel like there's a lot more that we don't know that is hidden, whether it be Caucasian history, white history, colonizers, black history, indigenous people history, Native American, Italian, Swedish, Russian? Regardless of what it is, do you think that there's a lot more things that we don't know? I do. And the only way that we can keep these things alive is just talking about it through oral history, because you're not going to find it in the history books. But thank you so much, guys, for watching. I know this was a tough video. Let me know what you think. And I will be doing another Parrots and True Crime video hopefully next week. It is going to be a very light video. It's not going to be anything like this one. I can probably only do these videos like maybe once a month, this heavy, or once every couple of months. But thank you so much, guys, for watching. I appreciate you so much. And as usual, toodaloo, bye bye.